Hey students, welcome to another Mr. Ness screencast. Today's aim is energy challenges, and here are your objectives. Please pause the video, look these questions over, and get ready to copy some vocab terms and take some notes. So this unit we've been in focuses on industry, and all industries require large amounts of energy to power the machines that produce goods and to transport those goods to markets. So today, you're going to look at some issues around the ways that energy is used in modern-day industry. Your first term is sustainability, an idea that you also learned about in the previous unit. Sustainability means meeting people's needs today in ways that do not compromise the ability of people in the future to meet their own needs. People today use huge amounts of natural resources, and a lot of them go into energy production. How can industrial production use resources in a sustainable way that will ensure that those resources still exist in the future? Since the Industrial Revolution, the major source of energy for industry has been fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are energy sources that are formed from decaying plants or small animals like plankton. That's why they're called fossil fuels. They come from old living things. Coal, petroleum, and natural gas are three examples of fossil fuels. Petroleum is also known as crude oil, and it's often just called oil. Petroleum is a thick black liquid that is mined from the ground and then refined into things like gasoline, plastics, or petroleum jelly, also called Vaseline. Non-renewable energy is energy that comes from resources that form too slowly to be renewed. In other words, these resources get depleted, they get used up. Non-renewable energy sources pose an obvious challenge to sustainability because once they're used up, there won't be any more for people in the future to use. All fossil fuels are non-renewable because they form from decaying plant and animal matter, and that process takes hundreds of millions of years. Another example of a non-renewable energy source is nuclear energy. Be careful. I've seen questions on the AP exam that ask about renewable energy, and one of the answer choices will be nuclear power. Don't be fooled. Although nuclear energy does not create greenhouse gases like fossil fuels do, it is still a non-renewable resource. The uranium that's used to create nuclear energy is rare, and it becomes depleted through use. In contrast to fossil fuels and nuclear power, renewable energy comes from resources that are continuously replaced. They do not get depleted, and they can be used again and again and again. Some examples of renewable energy sources are hydroelectric power, solar power, and wind power. Hydroelectric power comes from dams that are built on rivers, not on the ocean. Rivers. As the natural flow of the river passes through the dam, the water forces huge electromagnetics called turbines to spin and create electricity. Similarly, wind power is used to spin windmills, which also have turbines that create electricity. And solar power is gathered by solar panels, which collect the energy from sunlight and turn it into electricity. All of these forms of energy are renewable because their use in no way impacts their source. If I install a solar panel on my roof and gather solar power, I won't make the sun shine any less than it would if I wasn't gathering that power. All right, now let's go back to fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are burned in order to release energy as heat. But burning them also produces something called the greenhouse effect. Here's how it works. Take a look at the image. When fossil fuels like coal are burned, they release carbon dioxide and other gases into the atmosphere. And we call these gases greenhouse gases because once they're in the atmosphere, they trap heat in the same way that a greenhouse does on a farm. These gases form a layer of gas that sunlight from space can travel through towards the Earth, but once the sunlight hits the Earth and is reflected back into space, it cannot travel back through that layer of gas. And so the heat stays trapped in the Earth's atmosphere. Take a look at this graph, which shows the amount of carbon dioxide emissions by each country over time. This is a special kind of graph called an area graph, and it shows each country as a band of color. To read an area graph, you measure the distance between the top and the bottom of a certain band in a certain year. For example, look at the US, which is this bluish-green band. In 2018, the bottom of the US band is at about 5 billion. And the top of the US band is at about 10 million. The distance between the top and the bottom, 10 minus 5, is 5. So we can say that in 2018, the US emitted 5 billion tons of CO2. Now let's look at China, which is this reddish band. In 2018, China emitted about 10 billion tons of CO2, and I found that number by finding the lower point, which was about 17, and the upper point, which is about 27. 27 minus 17 is 10. Although China is the largest contributor to greenhouse gases today, the United States is the largest contributor over time. In general, we can say that MDCs like the US and all of Europe have contributed far more greenhouse gases than LDCs have. Look at Africa, the skinny blue band. The entire continent of Africa had fewer greenhouse gas emissions in 2018 than the US did just by itself. Because of the greenhouse effect, the burning of fossil fuels contributes to global warming, which is an increase in the average temperature of the Earth's climate. Global warming is an emergency that threatens the very existence of life on Earth. One of the major threats of global warming is sea level rise. That's when rising temperatures cause ice in the North and South poles to melt, which raises the level of the ocean. Sea level rise affects coastal regions because those are the places that are at risk of being flooded. Here's a map that shows countries according to the number of their citizens that are at risk of being affected by sea level rise. Countries that are affected most are ones that have large populations living near the coastline, and that's these countries in dark red. Take a moment to study the map and identify at least 3 countries that have the largest number of people at risk. That's at least 10 to 50 million people at risk of sea level rise. Another threat from global warming is desertification, and that is when previously arable or farmable land becomes too dry for farming. Desertification is bad because it threatens food supplies. The countries most at risk of desertification are dry countries, which have a lot of land bordering deserts. Basically, the desert in those countries will expand, swallowing up the arable lands around it. Here's a map that assesses countries' risk of desertification. Take a moment to identify at least 3 countries that are at very high risk. That's this dark brown color. All right, now it's time to review the objectives. If you don't know the answer to any of them, just rewind the video and look again. And I will see you in class. Bye, students.